If you grew up hearing Venezuela was always meant to fail, you were lied to because there was a time when Venezuela was not a warning story. It was a destination, a place where people arrived from Europe to build a life, a place with big construction, big salaries, and a currency that people trusted for decades. So today, I want to talk about the Venezuela that existed before Chavez, from the 1950s until the late 1990s, not to romanticize it, but to understand something simple. What is happening today did not appear from nowhere, and the idea of the United States working in Venezuelan oil fields is not new either. It is literally part of how old Venezuela became old Venezuela. Quick note before we begin. This video is about the past, but I'm also making deeper videos on 3 big eras. If you want the full deep story from 1950 to 1990, click the first link in the description. If you want the full deep story from 2000 to 2025, click the second link. And if you want 2020 tasks and the future opportunities, click the third link. Today is the foundation, the before, the Venezuela that many people outside the country barely know. In the early 1950s, Venezuela was under Marcos Pérez Jiménez. This matters because the 1950s were a contradiction. On one side, there was huge modernization. Oil royalties financed major public works, highways, buildings, major projects. The country was physically changing fast, but on the other side, it was not a free society. Political activity was repressed and the press was controlled. That era ended in January 1958 when Pérez Jiménez was overthrown. Here is the key lesson. Even in that period, you can already see the pattern. Oil money can build a country quickly, but what decides the future is what comes next. Institutions, rules, and whether the nation builds something beyond oil. After 1958, Venezuela enters a long democratic period, not perfect but stable enough to attract investment and plan long-term. And governments push development programs, agrarian reform, industrial development, health improvements, and big campaigns to reduce illiteracy. At the same time, Venezuela becomes a key player in global oil politics. Venezuela was a founding member of OPEC starting in 1960-61. And here is a fact that shocks many people today. From the late 1940s to 1970, Venezuela was the world's largest petroleum exporter, and it was one of the main exporters of oil to the United States. That relationship created something powerful, a flow of capital, technology, contracts, and expertise. And it fed a growing economy that people around the region looked at with envy. This is also when Venezuela becomes a magnet for immigrants. During an open immigration period from 1948-1958, Venezuela recruited agricultural and skilled workers from Spain, Italy, and Portugal. Around 1 million immigrants entered during that time, even though many later returned home. And academic work on Latin American migration notes that from the mid-1940s to the mid-1970s, more than 500,000 immigrants arrived in Venezuela from Spain, Italy, and Portugal. People do not move in large numbers to a country they think has no future. They come when they believe rules will be respected, when they believe the economy will grow, when they believe tomorrow will be better than today. Oil was the center. But Venezuela also expanded with iron ore, bauxite, coal, hydroelectric power, resources that can turn a country into an industrial power if managed well. In the mid-1970s, Venezuela nationalized major industries, including oil and iron ore, and oil export earnings funded infrastructure and public works. Now here's the part that people forget when they panic about foreign companies in Venezuela. Even after nationalization, PDVSA still relied heavily on foreign companies for refining, transport, marketing, and technical assistance. In other words, foreign participation did not disappear. It changed form from concessions to partnerships, services, and technical dependency. And the country's electricity system also shows how the state tried to build big. For example, hydroelectric power became central, and the Guri Dam became a major generating center, powering industry and mining regions. So when you hear U.S. machines extracting Venezuelan oil, understand the historical truth. That model, foreign technology, and as Venezuelan resources, has been part of the Venezuelan oil economy for generations. Now we get to the part people avoid because it ruins the perfect nostalgia. Britannica describes how Venezuela's development vision, sowing the oil, slowed down as oil prices fluctuated and recessions hit in the 1980s and 1990s, along with domestic problems like inflation, inefficient management, corruption, and lack of skilled personnel. Then comes a symbolic moment in Venezuelan memory, 1983, When currency controls shook investor confidence, international news at the time reported foreign investors were worried by the new controls and exchange rate changes. Many Venezuelans remember the bolivar as a currency that used to feel stable and then suddenly did not. And the social pressure explodes dramatically in 1989 with the Caracaso unrest. Officially reported deaths were 277, while other estimates vary widely. Even researchers note the figures remain contested and incomplete. This is the reality. Before Chavez, the system was already cracking, not because Venezuela had no wealth, but because wealth without discipline becomes a trap. Here is another detail people forget. In the late 1980s and 1990s, Venezuela adopted reforms that included reopening the petroleum sector to foreign investment, especially to develop heavy crude in the Orinoco region and to streamline production through joint ventures. A major research paper from Rice University's Baker Institute explains that in the 1990s, Venezuela successfully opened the oil sector to foreign investment through joint ventures and service contracts, adding more than 1 million barrels of production capacity. So again, the presence of foreign oil expertise was not an invasion. It was an economic strategy chosen to raise capacity and recover efficiency. Now let's connect this to the present fear people have today about the United States working in Venezuelan territory again. First, historically, the U.S. was one of the principal destinations for Venezuelan oil exports, and foreign firms were deeply involved before nationalization and remained important after it through services and technical help. Second, in early January 2026, major reporting described U.S. efforts to revive Venezuela's oil industry and the reality that rebuilding output would take years, massive investment, and legal reforms, because the infrastructure is damaged and investment conditions matter. And third, China also has deep ties in Venezuelan oil as a buyer and investor, including reported billions invested since 2016 and large volumes of Venezuelan crude going to China in 2025. So if you want a clear, mature way to think about it, think like this. Countries compete for Venezuela because Venezuela has strategic resources, oil, gas, and minerals. And whoever helps rebuild production gains influence. But the real question is not, will foreigners be present? They already were in the past, and they are present in different ways today. The real question is, under what rules? With what transparency? Who benefits? And what protections exist for Venezuelans? That is the lesson of the old Venezuela. The miracle was never just oil. It was oil plus functioning rules.